3 weeks after my stroke, I was standing in my own kitchen watching my daughter stir chicken soup when she slipped my truck keys off the counter and into her purse without asking me. She did it smooth as setting down a spoon. Never broke the sentence she was in. Just kept talking about sodium and rest and how Dr. Mercer wanted me taking it easy another week. Steam rose up off the pot between us and outside the sink window. The backyard maples were bare and wet from last night's rain. It was one of those Indiana March afternoons that looked like it had quit halfway through deciding to be spring. I said, "You planning on borrowing my truck?" Claire glanced up too fast. "What, my keys?" She put a hand to her purse like she'd forgotten it was there. "Oh, I just didn't want you overdoing it." I stood with one hand on the back of the kitchen chair, steadying myself more from habit than need. The rehab place had sent me home with exercises, a stack of papers, and a cane I used when my left leg felt heavy in the mornings. I didn't love the cane, but I used it. I wasn't stubborn about facts. That had never been my problem. "It's sitting in the driveway," I said, not exactly headed for Indianapolis on its own. Claire gave me the look she'd had since St. Vincent's, the one that tried to be cheerful and firm at the same time. It was a nurse's look, though she wasn't a nurse. Her mother had that look too when somebody had stitches or a fever or too much bourbon in him to keep upright. Only Elaine Harlan had always asked first. "Well, Claire said I'd just feel better if you didn't decide to run to Dalton's Hardware because you suddenly remembered you were out of screws." "I do happen to be out of screws." She smiled at that, relieved I'd made it easy. Then she turned back to the stove and the whole thing was over. Except it wasn't. My house had gotten small since I came home from rehab. Not in the walls. In the way people moved through it. Things changed places. Pill bottles appeared in neat rows by the toaster. A legal pad with times and dosages sat where the phone book used to be. My daughter opened and shut cabinets like she still lived there, and I couldn't decide whether that comforted me or worked on me. The kitchen smelled like broth and black pepper, and the lemon cleaner Denise had used on the counters yesterday. Claire had brought one of those grocery store loaves of French bread in a white paper sleeve, and it was leaning beside the fruit bowl like company had come. She was staying through lunch. Gavin was joining us after church committee or some church thing or bank thing or chamber thing. Gavin had a different serious obligation every Sunday and a different tie for each one. I sat down slow because sitting down had become something a man did in stages if he was honest. Claire set a mug of coffee in front of me before I asked. She still remembered I took it black. I watched her move around my kitchen and thought about the first apartment she'd had in Bloomington, how she called me crying because the garbage disposal made a sound like it was chewing forks. I'd driven down with a flashlight and a crescent wrench and found half a peach pit in it. Claire had stood there in socks and one of my old Notre Dame sweatshirts and watched me fix it like there had never been a machine or a problem in the world I couldn't settle with the right tool and enough patience. There's a kind of love a father gets used to. Not the loud kind, the useful kind. The kind with hinges and tires and checks written on time and a man showing up when he said he would. You don't think much about it while it's working. Then one day somebody takes your keys while the soup's still steaming and you find yourself wondering whether usefulness was the whole trick. The back door opened without a knock and Gavin came in carrying cold air and the smell of his aftershave. "There he is," he said, too bright. "How's our guy doing today?" "Our guy." He laid a bakery box on the counter and came around to clap me once on the shoulder, careful measured like I might crack. Gavin was a handsome man in a polished way. 44, tall, good haircut, those expensive shoes with no weather on them. He could stand in a factory conference room or at a charity banquet and look like he belonged in both. It was one of the reasons I'd liked him at first. The other reason was Claire. "Doing fine," I said. "Little stronger every day." Claire said for me. Gavin nodded like that confirmed something on an internal chart. That's what we like to hear. He loosened his tie and looked around the kitchen. "Smells great." Claire brightened. "I made his favorite. I nearly said it used to be your mother's favorite too, but I let it go. Elaine had been gone 6 years. Long enough for the casseroles after the funeral to be forgotten, not long enough for me to stop hearing her in certain rooms. Sometimes grief changes shape and settles into the house like old heat in the pipes. You don't hear it every minute, but you know which floorboards carry it. Gavin took the chair across from me and reached for the mail stacked by the salt shaker. I saw him glance through it quick, faster than somebody reading, more like sorting. Utilities insurance, some flyer from the tractor supply place, and one long white envelope. He turned face down before I could read the corner. I said, "Anything good?" "Mostly junk," he said. Claire ladled soup into bowls. "Dad, did you take the 11 o'clock pills?" "Sure did." "He did," Gavin said, as if I needed confirming. I looked at him. "I just told you." He smiled, palms up. "Just making sure we're all on the same page." There it was. Small enough to be nothing, sharp enough to stay. We ate at the kitchen table under the old brass light Elaine and I bought at a salvage place back in '89. Rainwater still clung to the window screen over the sink. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice and quit. Claire tore bread into pieces too small the way she did when she was worried. Gavin talked about stabilization periods and not rushing decisions. He meant me. He didn't always use my name when he meant me. Halfway through lunch, my phone rang in the den. I started to rise and Claire was up before I got a hand on the table. "I've got it. It's my phone. I know, Dad." She was already gone. Gavin kept eating eyes on his bowl. "You really ought to let things come to you for a little while." I said, "What things?" He blew on his soup. "Stress, noise, decisions." "You don't get medals for bouncing back too fast." I could feel heat climbing my neck. Not rage exactly, something meaner because it had nowhere proper to go. I took a sip of coffee and found it had gone lukewarm. Claire came back holding the cordless phone against her chest. It was just Denise. She could have spoken to me. She said she'd call later. Claire said, "I told her you were resting." I wasn't resting. I was sitting at my own table in my own house eating soup I had not asked for while my daughter kept my keys and my calls, and my son-in-law kept using that tone menus in waiting rooms and HR offices. After lunch, Gavin carried the bowls to the sink, which was new. He did it efficiently, like a man helping where he could be seen helping. Claire wiped the table. I took my mug into the den and stood by the front window looking at my truck in the driveway. Mud still dried along the wheel wells from before the stroke, back when I'd driven out to the south lot after a hard rain because one of the drainage ditches by Plant 2 had backed up. Plant 2. That thought came with its own reflex. Monday board materials used to arrive by courier or by hand if something was sensitive. Not because I asked for pomp, because that was the system. My system. I heard low voices in the hallway, then Claire's first tight and quick, Gavin's lower, flatter. "He doesn't need to be bothered with all that right now," Gavin said. A pause. Then Claire, quieter than before. "Are you sure it didn't already go to the house?" I stepped back before they saw me looking. When they came into the den, both of them wore those composed faces people put on before entering a hospital room. "You need anything?" Claire asked. "No." Gavin picked up his coat from the armchair. As he turned, something long and white slid part-way out from under it on the cushion. He caught it with one hand, but not before I saw the blue company mark in the corner. Harlan Industrial Systems, Board Governance Committee. He tucked the envelope under his arm like it belonged there and smiled at me. "Just some paperwork," he said. "Nothing you need to worry about." Gavin slid the envelope tighter under his arm and said it again, softer this time, like softness made it cleaner. "Nothing you need to worry about." Claire was watching me too closely. Not guilty exactly. More like anxious over whether she hoped might pass without breaking. I said Board Governance Committee isn't usually junk mail. Gavin gave a short laugh. "It isn't, but it's routine. Routine enough to bring to my house and tuck under your coat." Claire stepped in before he answered. "Dad, please don't do this right now." That was the first time she said it that way. Not Don't strain yourself. Not, let's talk later. Don't do this. Like the problem in the room was me naming what I'd seen. I looked at her, and for a second I saw the 8-year-old who used to sit on the basement steps in pigtails, waiting for me to come up from the workshop so she could show me a spelling test or a drawing of our dog. Then that child was gone. And here was this woman in my den, with one hand still damp from dishwater, asking me not to make trouble in my own house. Gavin shifted his weight, ready to smooth it all over. Walt, nobody's hiding anything. We're just trying to take pressure off you while you recover. Pressure. Recover. They had a word for every door they wanted closed. He left 5 minutes later with the envelope. Claire stayed behind to rinse the last bowl and wipe down counters that were already clean. I sat in my chair by the den window and watched her moving through the kitchen, putting the sponge back in the little ceramic tray Elaine bought at a church sale years ago, straightening the dish towel on the oven handle, checking the pill list by the toaster. She looked like a daughter. She looked like a guest. She looked like somebody working in a room that no longer belonged entirely to the man sitting 20 feet away. When she finally came in to get her purse, she paused by my chair. "You know he means well," she said. "Does he?" She let out a breath. "He's just trying to help everybody through this." "Everybody. You know what I mean?" I did. That was the trouble. I knew exactly what she meant. She meant the company. She meant the board. She meant her own nerves. She meant the embarrassment of not knowing whether your father might forget a name or lose a thought in a room full of people who had spent 30 years rising when he entered it. She kissed the top of my head before she left. I hated that I almost leaned into it. The next morning, I drove myself to Dr. Mercer's office. I used the spare set of keys from the junk drawer, the ones Elaine used to keep for emergencies and grocery runs. My left hand still felt a little thick around the knuckles first thing in the morning, and I had to think harder than I used to when backing out of the driveway, but I drove fine. Slow, maybe. Careful. There are worse ways for a man my age to move through the world. The neurologist's office smelled like printer paper and coffee that had been sitting too long on a warmer. A television in the corner played a daytime court show with the sound off. I checked in, sat under a framed watercolor of cattails, and watched two women at the desk move appointment cards around. Dr. Elaine Mercer came in 10 minutes late, carrying my file and folding her reading glasses as she sat down across from me. "How are you doing at home?" "Mr. Harlan, depends who you ask." That got the corner of her mouth up. She ran me through the usual things: words, numbers, a short memory sequence, hand strength, balance, questions about headaches and fatigue. I answered everything clean. Not perfectly fast, maybe, but clean. When I missed one number backward and got it right the second time, she made a note and kept going. She didn't wince. She didn't tilt her head with pity. She just watched and listened and did her work. At the end, she set the file down and said, "You are recovering in a normal range for the event you had. Your endurance isn't all the way back, and you may notice fatigue under stress, but your decision-making capacity is intact." I sat with that a second. Intact. "You mind writing that down?" I asked. She looked at me then, not as a doctor exactly, but as a woman who had heard the question underneath the question. "Family trouble," she said. "Concern," I said. She nodded once, as if that answer told her plenty. Then she turned to her desk and typed up a short note, signed it, and slid it across to me. I folded it carefully and put it in my inside jacket pocket. "Mr. Harlan," she said before I got up, "needing recovery time is not the same thing as lacking competence." I looked at her. She held my eyes a moment longer than doctors usually do when the exam is over. "Those are two different things. Don't let anyone blend them." Outside, the air had gone colder. I sat in the truck with the engine running and the doctor's note in my pocket and thought about Claire at 16 in the passenger seat after she failed her first driver's test. She'd cried all the way from the BMV to a Dairy Queen off State Road 38 because the examiner said she hesitated too long at a four-way stop. I'd bought her a dipped cone and told her hesitation wasn't stupidity. It was nerves. We'd gone back the next week and she passed. For years afterward, she used to laugh about how dramatic she'd been over a stop sign. Now here I was with a doctor's note in my pocket, proving I still knew my own mind. My daughter had taken my keys like a mother from a teenager who'd come home smelling like beer. By noon, I was parked in the small lot beside Plant 1. I didn't go inside right away. I sat a minute, watching men in work jackets come and go through the side door, boots wet from the slush at the curb, lunch coolers swinging from their hands. Harlan Industrial Systems had started in a rented cinder block building with 2 lathes, 3 men, and a coffee pot, older than any of us. Now there were 3 plants and a polished office wing Gavin liked to show bankers and suppliers, all glass and brushed steel and framed aerial photos. He said it helped people see we weren't stuck in the old manufacturing mindset. What he meant was that men like me could make a place, but men like him could make it presentable. Inside, the receptionist blinked when she saw me and stood up so fast her chair rolled backward into the file cabinet. "Mr. Harlan, I didn't know you were coming in." "Neither did I said. That wasn't quite true. I'd decided in the truck, but it felt better saying it that way. I took the elevator to the 2nd floor. My office was still there at the end of the hall, though I hadn't used it much since stepping back from day-to-day operations 2 years earlier. Gavin had taken the CEO suite with the corner windows. Mine kept the older wood furniture Elaine once said made the room look like a county judge's office. I liked it for that very reason. Lena Morales was at the operations desk when I stepped off the elevator. She had worked with me almost 18 years, first in purchasing and then in executive admin because she had a better head for sequence and paper than most men I'd ever hired. She looked up from her screen and went still. "Mr. Harlan." "Lena," she stood. "You look good. I look vertical." That made her smile for half a breath. Then it was gone. I could tell she had something on her mind before she spoke. It was in the way she pressed her lips together and glanced once toward Gavin's office. "Did you need anything?" she asked. I looked at her. "You tell me." Her eyes came back to mine, careful now. She lowered her voice. "I assumed you'd already reviewed the transition packet." "The what?" She hesitated. "I'm sorry. You thought wrong." "Start over." She looked down the hall again, then picked up a manila folder from beneath a stack on her desk and held it against her side. There was a draft governance packet prepared for next week's committee review. Temporary authority alignment language. Sign-off routing. It came through marked urgent. Who marked it urgent? She didn't answer right away. That was answer enough. Did it say it came from me? I asked. No. Did it say I approved it? It said the current circumstances made timing important. Current circumstances? I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. Not racing, just present. Lena swallowed. I thought maybe you and Mr. Cole had already discussed it. No, I said. We had not. She looked miserable now, which made me feel sorry for her when I was in no mood for generosity. I'm not trying to interfere, she said quietly. I just thought you should know there are emails. Emails. She nodded. About not overloading you, about moving while things are still manageable. Manageable. That word sat in my chest like something swallowed the wrong way. I put one hand on the edge of her desk until the room settled. Not because I was confused. Because anger and weakness travel through a man's body different when he's 71 and still coming back from a stroke. You feel them in the same places at first. Lena slid the manila folder toward me, just enough for me to see the cover sheet. Board Governance Committee. Temporary Delegation Framework. Draft. Below that in smaller type, prepared in light of owner recovery status. I stared at those words long enough for them to stop looking like language and start looking like intent. When I got home, Denise was in my kitchen snapping green beans into a bowl. She came on Monday, same as she had off and on since Elaine died, bringing groceries I didn't ask for and opinions I rarely escaped. She looked up once and said, "You look mean. That's because I've had a good day." She set the bowl down. "What happened?" I handed her Dr. Mercer's note first. Then I laid the copied cover sheet from Lena's folder on the table beside it. Denise read both, one after the other, and let out a long breath through her nose. "That boy," she said. "It's not just him." "No," she said, looking back at the papers. "It never is." I sat down at the kitchen table under the brass light. The room had gone blue-gray with late afternoon. Denise turned on the lamp by the phone, and the old yellow glow fell over the wood grain, over the note from the doctor, over the draft cover sheet, over the water ring from where Claire's coffee cup had sat the day before. I pulled my wall calendar closer. Then I found the rehab discharge papers. Then the follow-up appointment card. Then the date Dr. Mercer cleared my decision-making. Then the date printed on the packet draft Lena had copied. One by one I set them in a line across the table. I looked at the dates again, and then I saw it plain. They had started moving authority after I'd already been cleared. Not before, not during the foggiest week. After. Not fear then, not caution, not love either. Denise stood at the stove without turning a burner on. She had both hands on the edge of the counter, looking down at the papers spread under my kitchen light like they were cards in a game neither of us had agreed to play. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I kept looking at the dates. The doctor's note sat nearest my right hand. Beneath it was the rehab discharge sheet, then the follow-up appointment summary, then the draft cover page Lena had copied for me. A yellow pad lay open beside them with my own handwriting on it, slower than it used to be, but still mine. Monday. Cleared. Thursday. Internal routing. Friday. Committee packet draft. Gavin had waited until a doctor had already said I could think for myself. Then he had built a case on the idea that maybe I couldn't. I sat back in my chair and looked toward the dark kitchen window over the sink. My own reflection stared back at me, older than I felt most days, not older than I felt that night. There is a kind of tiredness that comes from work, and a kind that comes from pain, and another kind entirely that comes from seeing something clearly after you've spent too long making excuses for it. "Tomorrow," I said, "I'm calling a board meeting." Denise let out one short breath through her nose. "Good, not for theatrics. I know who my brother is. I want Lena there. Dr. Mercer, too, if she'll come. I want the timeline in the room before Gavin opens his mouth." "You think Claire knows how bad it is?" That was the question that had been sitting under everything else. I looked down at the table, at the doctor's note, at the dates, at the place where my daughter's hand had rested the day before, flat on the wood, asking me not to do this right now. "I think Claire knew enough to stop him," I said. "That's not the same thing." Denise didn't answer. She knew there wasn't a better one. The next morning I shaved slow and dressed in the charcoal suit I kept for funerals, bank meetings, and things a man wanted to be taken seriously in. It hung a little looser on me than it had before the stroke. I noticed it, then stopped noticing it. I put on Elaine's old gold watch, the one she bought me for our 25th anniversary, because mine had finally given out after years of machine oil and rain and bad treatment. The band had been resized twice in 40 years. It still fit. I drove myself in. That part mattered more than I would have admitted a week earlier. The roads were damp and patched with old salt at the shoulders. A school bus stopped 2 streets over while I waited at the light by the pharmacy, and I watched little kids climb down in oversized coats with backpacks half as big as they were. Across from the plant, the diner with the red awning had its open sign lit and 3 county trucks parked outside. It was an ordinary Tuesday in Indiana. Men were ordering bacon and eggs. Women were dropping off dry cleaning. Somebody was probably arguing about drain tile or Purdue basketball over bad coffee. I parked in my usual spot. I still thought of it as my spot, though I hadn't used it much in 2 years. Lena met me at the elevator with a folder held flat against her chest. She was dressed in navy and looked like she hadn't slept much. "Everything's set," she said quietly. "Dr. Mercer." "She's here." She said she could stay 20 minutes. I nodded once. "That's all I need." The boardroom sat at the far end of the glass corridor Gavin loved because it made the office wing look bigger and newer than it was. From the parking lot side, you could see trucks idling at the loading dock and men in safety vests crossing between buildings. That view had always pleased me more than the framed photos in the lobby. Work in motion. Steel and timing and people showing up. When I walked in, Gavin was already at the table, jacket off shirt sleeves, neat a stack of packets arranged in front of him. Claire sat 2 chairs down with both hands around a paper cup she wasn't drinking from. She looked pale. The other board members were there too. Don Kessler from Finance, Ruth Whitman from Legal, and Paul Drennan, who'd been with me long enough to remember when we still ran payroll on Thursdays by hand, if the system locked up. Gavin stood when he saw me, and for 1 second I saw surprise plain on his face before he replaced it with concern. "Walt," he said, "you didn't have to come in for this. We could have—" "I know what you could have done," I said. The room went still. Not dramatic stillness, real stillness. The kind where chairs stop squeaking and nobody reaches for coffee. I took my seat at the head of the table. That was the second thing that mattered. Gavin stayed standing a second too long, then sat down. Claire looked at me, then looked away. Ruth cleared her throat. "Mr. Harlan requested this meeting. I assume he'd like to begin." "I would," I said. My voice sounded older than it had 10 years ago, but it carried. I didn't need more than that. "I'm going to save us some time," I said. "This isn't a routine governance discussion. This is a question of authority timing and false representation." Gavin leaned forward, palms open on the table. "I think we need to be careful with language." I looked at him. "You do?" His jaw moved once. Just once. I opened the folder Lena had prepared and took out Dr. Mercer's statement first. 3 weeks ago, I had a stroke. I was fortunate. My recovery has been real, but so has the damage it gave some people room to imagine. I slid the note down the table toward Ruth. "This is from my neurologist. Dated last Monday. It confirms that my decision-making capacity is intact." Nobody spoke. Ruth picked it up and read. Then Paul leaned across for it. Don followed. Gavin folded his hands. "No one has disputed that you're improving. That's not what I said. I let that sit. Then I laid the packet cover sheet on the table beside the doctor's note. This, I said, is a draft governance packet prepared after I was medically cleared. It references temporary delegation based on my recovery status. It was routed urgently. I did not authorize it." Claire looked at Gavin, then fast, like maybe she still expected a version of this she could survive with less shame. Gavin turned to the others with that same careful managerial calm he used when explaining cost overruns or delivery delays. "I think this is being misunderstood. We were trying to prepare for contingencies. We all know recovery can fluctuate." "Recovery can fluctuate," I said. "Truth shouldn't." Then I went through the dates. I did it slow, not because I was weak, because slow was the cleanest way to kill what he'd built. Rehab discharge, follow-up appointment, medical clearance, internal email chain, draft packet, committee routing. Lena spoke when Ruth asked her directly whether the dates were accurate. Her voice shook at first, then steadied. She confirmed the routing, the urgency flag, the wording about timing. She confirmed that the materials had not come from me and had not been sent to me. Then Dr. Mercer spoke. She had no interest in anybody's feelings by that point, which was exactly what made her useful. She said my recovery had physical limits and fatigue considerations, but that no one had any medical basis to represent me as unable to make informed decisions. She said it once. Then she said it again more plainly when Don asked if there had ever been such a basis. "No," she said, "there has not." That was when the room changed. Not because anybody gasped, Not because Gavin cracked in two or confessed anything useful. Rooms like that don't work that way. They shift by degree. A head turns. A silence lengthens. A man who thought he was leading starts looking like he's explaining. Gavin straightened his cufflinks. That was the first genuinely frightened thing he'd done all morning. He turned to me and tried one last time to step back into the language that had carried him this far. Walt. If I moved too quickly, it was because I was trying to protect the company and your family from uncertainty. I looked at him, and for the first time since this began, I didn't feel my anger as heat. I felt it as shape. Clean, finished, ready. You didn't mistake my condition, Gavin, I said. You used it. Claire shut her eyes. I kept going. You answered for me in my house. You filtered information that belonged to me. You built urgency around weakness that had already been medically defined and limited. And you did it while sitting in a chair this family gave you and running a company you were trusted to lead, not quietly absorb. He opened his mouth, but Paul got there first. Is it true, Paul said, looking at Gavin, that you began this after medical clearance? Gavin said, That's an unfair simplification. Ruth set both palms on the table. That isn't an answer. Don, who hated mess of any kind, looked like he'd swallowed vinegar. Good Lord. Gavin turned to Claire. Bad mistake. She looked at him and then at me, and in that moment I saw her understand the size of the thing. Not just the paperwork, not just the company, the house, the keys, the phone calls, the way she had spoken around me because it was easier than standing in front of me and hearing herself do it. Dad, she said, and it came out thin. I didn't rescue her from that. That was the cost. Ruth asked me one final question formal enough for the minutes. Mr. Harlan, as majority owner, what action are you requesting from the board? I had thought about that all night. There are men who enjoy punishment. I have known some. I have never been one. If I had wanted spectacle, I could have had it. I had enough in that room to humiliate him in the way he'd tried to humiliate me, neat and smiling. I didn't want that. I wanted order. I'm requesting immediate suspension of Mr. Cole's authority, pending formal review, I said. And I'm requesting his resignation be accepted if he offers it before the review concludes. Gavin stared at me. Ruth turned to him. Mr. Cole. He looked around the room and saw finally that the room was no longer his. I think he said carefully, given the emotional temperature here, resignation may be the cleanest course. Cleanest, even then. Ruth nodded once. So noted. It was over faster than I expected after that. Paperwork, formalities, Dr. Mercer leaving with a brief squeeze to my shoulder, Lena gathering folders, Paul lingering long enough to say, Glad to see you back, Walt, in a voice that meant more than the words did. Claire waited for me in the hallway after everyone else had gone. The glass wall beside us looked out over the loading dock. A forklift beeped in reverse somewhere below. Men were moving steel crates through a wet patch of sun that had broken finely through the clouds. I was scared, she said. I know. I thought he was handling things. He was. She flinched. That hurt me more than I expected. Not because she deserved gentleness in that moment, because I still wanted to give it. I never thought you were gone, she said. And I believe she believed that. No, I said. You just acted like I might be. Tears came into her eyes then. Claire had cried more easily as a girl than as a woman. Seeing it now didn't heal much. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded. There are apologies that open a door and apologies that stand outside one. I didn't know yet which kind this was. I touched her elbow once the way I had when she was little and crossing icy parking lots. And then I went past her. I drove out to Crown Hill in the late afternoon. The roads were drying. The sky had that washed-out gold March gives you when winter is finally tired of itself. I stopped once for gas, and once because my left leg cramped at a red light and I needed to stretch it. Nobody hurried me. Nobody took my keys. Nobody said, let's keep things simple. Elaine's grave sat halfway up the east slope under a line of bare oaks. The grass was still winter flat and pale. Somebody had left silk flowers, 2 stones over bright purple and too cheerful for the season. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets for a while before I stepped closer. Her name was cut deep and clean. Elaine Marie Harlan. Beloved wife, mother, steady heart. That last part had been Claire's choice. Steady heart. I rested one hand on the top of the stone. The granite held the day's cold. For a long minute I didn't say anything. Wind moved through the oaks with that dry, high sound it makes before leaves come back. Somewhere farther off, a groundskeeper's mower coughed and stopped. Then I said, quiet as I pleased, because there was no one left to speak over me, "I'm still here." I stood a little longer after that until the cold found its way through the soles of my shoes. Then I went back to the truck, sat with both hands on the wheel and watched the light settle lower across the stones before I started the engine and headed home.